The sky over New York had never looked so wrong. It was not clouds or storms, not the kind that came with thunder and rain. It was steel and shadow. Colossal alien warships hung above the skyline like monuments of doom, their shapes so massive they blocked out the sun in pieces. The world had seen them arrive on live broadcasts a month earlier. First there had been awe, even hope. Humanity had waited centuries for contact, expecting enlightenment or guidance. Instead, what came was a declaration. No negotiation, no alliance, no room for compromise. The voice that spoke from their ships was cold, metallic, almost bored. Humanity has trespassed into technologies it cannot control. Your wars, your weapons, your pollution, all have shown you are unfit. You are a threat to order. You will kneel under our empire or be erased. That was the moment Earth changed. I remember where I was. I had been standing in the ruins of my family's home, 2 hours after the first bombardments reduced half of Boston to fire and glass. My wife and son hadn't made it out of the building before the shockwave swallowed them. I dug with my bare hands through stone and steel until the skin on my knuckles tore open. But all I found was silence beneath the rubble. That silence burned into me. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something darker. I wasn't alone in that feeling. The streets were filled with broken men who had lost everything in a single day. Fathers with blood on their shirts that wasn't theirs. Soldiers too numb to scream. Civilians with nothing left but the clothes on their backs. In every corner of the ruined city, eyes burned the same way mine did. With a promise. The invaders thought we were weak. They thought humanity would break. They had no idea what they had awakened. The first months were slaughter. Their technology was centuries ahead of ours. Cities crumbled like paper. Tanks were melted where they stood, and even nuclear strikes barely scratched their fleets. Humanity bled, retreat after retreat, every headline screaming extinction. But here's the truth nobody tells in history books. Desperation makes men clever. Desperation makes men dangerous. I was drafted into the resistance not because I was a soldier, but because I refused to die quietly. They handed me a rifle too old to matter against alien armor and told me I'd learn quick or not at all. The first time I fired it, my hands shook so bad I nearly shot the man next to me. But shaking turns steady when hate becomes your anchor. We learned their weaknesses, slowly, painfully. Their arrogance was our first advantage. They underestimated us. Their patrols grew lazy, their outposts lightly guarded. A small unit of farmers and construction workers could ambush them with homemade explosives and make them bleed. And when they bled, they screamed. That was the first time we knew they weren't gods. They were flesh and blood. They could be killed. Word spread. Across continents, humans who had never agreed on anything before now shared one purpose: revenge. The invaders declared war on Earth. But humanity? Humanity declared the end of their civilization. I remember the night our unit brought down our first dropship. We had hidden charges beneath an abandoned overpass, waiting for hours in the dark, hearing our own breathing louder than the wind. When the alien craft passed low, I hit the trigger. The explosion split the night apart, fire consuming the sky as the ship crashed into the river. For the first time since this nightmare began, we cheered. Not because the war was won. No, far from it. But because we had made them hurt. It was the beginning of something bigger than survival. We were no longer fighting for lives. We were fighting for vengeance. I swore that night, standing on the burning wreckage of their ship, that I would not rest until every one of their cities, every one of their people tasted the same ruin they had given us. They took my family. They took our planet. And we were going to take everything from them. The world had lost mercy. Humanity had found its true nature, and our true nature was war. The ruins of Boston were only the beginning. The world itself had turned into a graveyard, and from every grave, Men like me crawled back with fire in their eyes. The first months blurred together in chaos. Smoke was the new sky. Ash was the new ground. Entire nations had been cut into scars. London flattened, Tokyo drowning under the wreckage of orbital strikes, Moscow reduced to molten glass. The aliens didn't discriminate. They wanted obedience, and when we refused, they burned everything that carried the human name. But something they didn't understand was this: destruction doesn't erase people. It forges them. Every city they leveled created thousands of men with nothing left to lose, men who didn't fear death anymore because death had already taken what mattered. That was their mistake. I started as one man in one cell of resistance. Our unit was barely 20 strong, armed with rifles older than my father's generation and bombs made from stolen fertilizer. We slept in subway tunnels, breathed mold and dust, and fed on rats when food ran dry. Yet every night we rose out of the shadows and carved scars into their patrols. One night we planted charges along a street in the North End. When their convoy rolled through, armored and arrogant, we turned it into a furnace. Their machines burned. Their soldiers screamed in that metallic voice through their helmets, and the survivors stumbled into our ambush. I remember pulling the trigger until my rifle clicked dry, the barrel steaming against the cold. That ambush wasn't just an attack. It was a message. Humans would not kneel. News traveled faster than bullets. In Africa, militias that once fought each other now turned their guns toward the sky. In South America, cartels and armies buried their blood feuds and shared the same battlefield. In Europe, remnants of shattered governments and street gangs fought shoulder to shoulder. Humanity, for the first time in history, had one enemy, and that unity became our greatest weapon. I didn't know it then, but our small victories were echoes of a much larger war being born. The aliens tried to silence us with terror. Their ships dropped firestorms on entire neighborhoods if a single patrol went missing. They executed civilians in the streets, broadcasting it over hijacked satellites, trying to force us into despair. But instead of fear, it bred rage. For every body they left rotting in the open, 10 more humans joined the resistance. The aliens had power, we had fury, and fury, once lit, does not die. The turning point for me came during what we later called the Siege of Providence. Our unit had been ordered north, carrying stolen explosives in the back of a half-broken truck. Providence had become one of their regional command posts, filled with fortified towers of alien steel and swarming with their soldiers. It was suicide for us to even approach, but suicide had become our language. We struck at dawn. The first blasts shook their towers, ripping through their fuel supplies. Flames shot into the sky like the city itself was screaming. Their soldiers swarmed out, metallic footsteps pounding the streets. We hit them from every alley, every rooftop, gunfire echoing between crumbling buildings. I remember crouching behind a half-collapsed diner, reloading with blood on my hands that wasn't mine, hearing the cries of men I'd fought beside for months. Hours felt like days. Every street became a battlefield. We had no armor, no shields, just grit and hate. But somehow by nightfall, their command center lay in ruins. Smoke poured into the sky where their banners once stood. We lost half our men, but the other half stood in the wreckage, faces blackened with soot, eyes lit with the fire of victory. Providence wasn't just another battle. It was proof. Proof that the invincible could bleed, that the untouchable could fall. And when the rest of the world saw it, humanity's roar shook the heavens. That was when coordination began. Scattered cells of resistance, once blind and divided, began to unite. Old governments that had collapsed rose in fragments underground, trying to stitch together communication across continents. Soldiers who had once worn different flags now wore no flag but survival. We shared tactics, weapons, and victories. The resistance became something greater than scattered rebellion. It became a war. I rose with it. Not by choice, but because war forces men to step forward when others fall. After Providence, they started calling me commander, though I still thought of myself as just a broken man with a rifle. But men followed me, not because I was special, but because I carried the same scars they did. Because I had nothing left to lose, and that kind of man is dangerous to stand behind. We fought across the wreckage of cities, turning ruins into fortresses. We dug tunnels beneath the rubble, planted mines in the skeletons of highways, and used their own technology against them whenever we could steal it. Their weapons, once untouchable, became our trophies. I learned to fire their rifles, to pilot their drones. Every stolen piece of tech became a knife in their side. The aliens began to realize something they hadn't expected. They thought conquering Earth would be like crushing an insect. Instead, it was like stepping barefoot into a nest of fire ants. Every move they made bled them, drained them. For every human they killed, a dozen more rose with vengeance in their hearts. And worse, for them, we were learning. The first time I saw an alien die up close, I expected triumph. What I felt was something colder. We'd ambushed a patrol outside Hartford, laying traps along a burned-out street. When the firefight ended, one of them was still breathing, armor cracked, blood seeping like dark oil from its wounds. It clawed at the ground, reaching for a weapon just inches from its grasp. I kicked it away, watching the creature's pale, insect-like face twist in pain, its eyes, black and lidless, fixed on me. "Human," it rasped, its voice stripped of arrogance. "Mercy!" That was when I understood the truth. They were not gods. They were not untouchable. They were flesh, weak when broken, afraid when cornered. And Mercy? Mercy had died in Boston with my family. I put my rifle to its skull and pulled the trigger. After that, the hesitation in me was gone. As months turned to years, the war became something no alien strategist had predicted. Humanity, a fractured, divided species, had become united by hate. Entire generations of young men who should have grown up in schools and cities instead grew up in bunkers, with rifles in their hands and fire in their hearts. Every battle cost us, but every loss was fuel. Entire cities became legends. The Battle of Rio, where barefoot children armed with stolen grenades brought down an armored division. The defense of Cairo, where priests fought beside soldiers in the burning ruins of their mosques. The ghosts of Siberia, men who disappeared into the frozen wastes and re-emerged months later with alien heads on pikes. The invaders had declared war on Earth, but humanity had declared their extinction. And the galaxy was about to learn what happens when men are cornered. That was the middle ground. The resistance was no longer survival. It was offense. We no longer waited for their patrols. We hunted them. Sabotage became an art. We hijacked their supply lines, poisoned their food stores, hacked their communication relays. We stole their weapons and used them against them until they no longer trusted their own tools. The first time we captured one of their warships intact, I stood on its bridge, staring out at the wreckage of their fleet below. My reflection in the glass was not the man I remembered. The grief-stricken father I had been was gone. What looked back at me was something colder, harder. A man carved from fire and vengeance. The men around me cheered. For the first time, we were not prey. We were predators. And I knew in my bones, this was only the beginning. The aliens had started a war they thought would be quick, clean, efficient. But they had awakened something they couldn't kill with bombs or fire. They had awakened humanity's wrath. And wrath, once born, only ends in one thing: obliteration. The first time we left Earth's atmosphere, It wasn't in triumph. It was in stolen metal and desperation. The ship was a wreck. Half its hull scorched black from orbital bombardments, its controls filled with alien symbols none of us understood. We'd taken it during the siege of Berlin, when resistance fighters managed to ambush a landed cruiser and slaughter its crew from within. Most of the systems barely worked. Engines stuttered like a dying heartbeat. Life support groaned and hissed, and half the consoles were dark. But for us, it was more than a machine. It was a key. The key to taking the war beyond Earth. I stood on the bridge, my reflection ghosted in the cracked glass of the viewport. Beyond, Earth hung like a wounded jewel, scarred with fire and smoke. From orbit, you could see the ruin. Entire continents blackened, oceans shimmering with oil and ash. My stomach clenched as I stared down at what had once been home. I thought of my family buried beneath Boston, of the countless graves stretching from one horizon to the other. And then I looked outward, into the endless black where their empire waited. "This isn't about survival anymore," I said to the men gathered behind me. Soldiers, engineers, broken farmers turned fighters, all with the same hunger in their eyes. "This is about payback." No one argued. They didn't need to. Every man on that bridge had lost everything already. The first campaign off-world was chaos. We didn't know how to fight in space. Our stolen ship coughed and lurched like a wounded beast, its weapons unfamiliar, its shields flickering. But we learned. Just as we had on Earth, we learned fast. Our first target was one of their supply stations orbiting Jupiter. It loomed in the dark, a cold fortress of steel and light, guarded by sleek patrol craft. They didn't expect us. Humans weren't supposed to leave Earth. Humans weren't supposed to even be alive anymore. We came in quiet, engines cut to a whisper, drifting like space debris. When we got close enough, we fired everything at once. The station lit up in panic, their patrols scrambling, but we were already inside. Boarding pods slammed into the hull, our men pouring through with stolen rifles. The fighting was brutal, hallways choked with smoke and blood. The aliens fought hard, but we fought harder. We weren't soldiers with orders. We were widowers, orphans, broken men with fire in our chests. When the station finally went dark, its lights flickering out like dying stars, silence filled the comms. And then, slowly, laughter. Human laughter, ragged and disbelieving. We had taken our first step into their empire. From there, it spread like wildfire. Resistance cells across the planet scrambled to capture more of their ships, some by sabotage, others by sheer desperation. Every time one of their vessels went down intact, we swarmed it like wolves, tearing it apart and learning how it worked. Within a year, we had a fleet. Not much of one, patched together with stolen tech and human ingenuity, but enough. And that was all we needed. The war left Earth behind. We struck their outposts on Mars, shattered their relay stations orbiting Saturn, and burned their fuel depots hidden in the asteroid belt. Each raid was costly, men dying in airless silence, their bodies drifting into the void. But each victory was louder than the last. The galaxy was watching, and the message was clear. Humanity would not die quietly. We were coming for them. What the aliens never understood was this. War is not just weapons and numbers. War is will, and no one had more will than us. They fought for order, for empire, for some cold notion of control. We fought for graves, for the ghosts of our families, for the billions of voices silenced beneath their fire. That kind of fight doesn't end until the last man falls. I saw it in every battle. Men who should have collapsed kept fighting, dragging themselves through blood and smoke just to pull a trigger one more time. Pilots ramming crippled ships into alien cruisers, laughing through their last breaths. Soldiers clinging to life support cables, firing until the vacuum swallowed them. Humanity had nothing left to lose, and that made us the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever seen. The aliens began to crack. At first, they dismissed us as pests, a nuisance. Then, as the raids spread, as their supply lines collapsed and their outposts burned, I saw something new in their eyes. Fear. We captured prisoners during the raid on Titan, their cold arrogance stripped away. One of them, bleeding and shaking, whispered to me in broken human speech, You do not stop. You should not exist." He was right. By their logic, we shouldn't. By every rule of war, Earth should have fallen in weeks. But they had miscalculated. They had measured us by our technology, not by our spirit. And spirit cannot be measured. Spirit only burns. The day we captured our first capital ship was the day the war truly changed. It happened near the edge of their territory, during an ambush that should have killed us. Their warship was massive, a leviathan of steel bristling with weapons. Our fleet was smaller, weaker, pieced together with scrap. But desperation makes men cunning. We baited them into a minefield hidden in the belt, detonating charges that tore holes in their shields. And then we swarmed. Dozens of human fighters, stolen and modified, latched onto the hull like angry insects. Explosives carved through its armor, cutting open wounds we poured through. Inside, the battle raged for hours, corridors painted with blood and fire. I led from the front, rifle in hand, the memory of Boston burning in my chest with every shot. When the ship finally fell silent, its alien banners ripped down, I stood on its bridge with smoke rising around me. Earth's flag, a tattered remnant carried by one of my men, was hung across the viewport. That was the day humanity stopped being prey. That was the day we became conquerors. With the capital ship under our control, everything shifted. We weren't just raiding anymore, we were invading. The next targets weren't stations or outposts. They were colonies, cities of alien steel, worlds that had never known fear. We descended on them with fire and fury, bringing their own war machines to their streets. For every human city they had burned, we burned 2 of theirs. For every child they had slaughtered, we left their nurseries in ash. Mercy was gone. I'll never forget the first time I walked through one of their cities after the fighting. The air was thick with smoke, their towers toppled, their civilians fleeing in terror. Some begged, some cursed us in their tongue. I felt no pity, not anymore. One of my soldiers asked me once if we were becoming monsters, if our vengeance was making us no different than them. I looked at him, his face lined with scars, eyes hollowed by loss, and I told him the truth. We already became monsters the day they took everything from us. Now we're just showing them what monsters can do. The galaxy began to tremble. News of our campaign spread beyond their empire, reaching worlds we had never heard of. Species that had once bowed to their rule watched as humanity, a species they thought weak and primitive, tore through their masters like wolves through sheep. Some whispered our name like a curse, others like a prayer. For us, it didn't matter. We weren't fighting for reputation. We weren't fighting for glory. We were fighting for one thing only: vengeance. And vengeance is never satisfied until the enemy is ash. I knew then that there was no going back. Earth was already lost, scarred beyond repair. Our families were already gone. Humanity itself had been remade in fire. We were no longer the species we once were, dreamers, builders, explorers. We had become something else, something the galaxy had never seen before. We had become executioners, and the empire that had declared war on Earth was already living on borrowed time. The fleet hung in orbit like a swarm of scars across the stars. Our ships weren't elegant like theirs. They were ugly things, patched together with human steel, alien alloys, and desperation. Engines rattled. Weapons glowed unevenly, jury-rigged from stolen designs. If you looked at them too long, you could see the chaos in their construction. But they flew, and more importantly, they killed. At the center of the formation was the capital ship we'd taken months before. Its alien hull still bore scorch marks from the battle, but its decks now echoed with human boots, its control rooms reprogrammed with stolen code. Across its bridge, banners of Earth's resistance hung where the enemy's emblems once loomed. This ship had been born in their empire, but it was ours now, and it carried us straight into their heart. The target was a colony world they called Veyus, a jewel in their empire. I'd studied its transmissions for weeks, fertile lands, gleaming cities, a population fat and unscarred by war. They had lived in peace while Earth burned. They had laughed while our skies fell, and tonight they would learn what laughter cost. I stood before my men in the briefing chamber. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow, but their expressions burned with the same fire that lived in me. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were wolves, sharpened by loss, hardened by blood. They wanted war, I said, voice low but steady. They brought it to our homes, to our families. Now we take it to theirs. No mercy, no forgiveness. Tonight, they learn what it means to make humanity bleed. The silence after my words was heavier than steel, and then, slowly, one man slammed his fist against the table. Another followed. Soon the room shook with the rhythm of fists, with voices rising into a roar. We weren't going to fight. We were going to burn. The descent on Veyus was nothing like our battles on Earth. On Earth, we had fought from the ruins, hidden in tunnels and shadows, always outnumbered, always weaker. But here we were the storm. We fell from the sky in streaks of fire, dropships tearing through their atmosphere. Their defenses activated in panic. Sleek turrets spitting beams of light into the heavens, but our fleet drowned them in fire. Their skies turned red. Their towers crumbled. When our boots hit the ground, the city was already screaming. I remember the sound of it. Alien civilians crying in tones that rattled the bones, scattering through streets littered with smoke. Their soldiers rushed to meet us, armored and disciplined, but they met men who had nothing left to lose. We ripped through them like knives through cloth. Bullets, plasma, blades, every weapon in our hands sang with vengeance. I moved with my squad through the chaos, rifle steady, every trigger pull echoing Boston in my mind. For every face I saw in the rubble of Earth, I left one more alien corpse behind me. The air reeked of burning fuel, blood, and ash. The city that had once stood untouched now burned like ours had. We gave them what they had given us. It didn't stop at soldiers. That was the truth none of us liked to say aloud. But all of us knew. The aliens hadn't spared our civilians. They had slaughtered children, elders, the helpless, and when vengeance finally came to their door, our men did the same. I walked through streets littered with bodies. Some carried weapons, many did not. Men dragged aliens from their homes, flames devouring their dwellings. There were screams, high, inhuman, piercing. Once I passed a young fighter, barely more than a boy, standing over a trembling alien family. His rifle shook in his hands, eyes wild. He looked at me, waiting, asking for something. I said nothing. He fired. The sound echoed down the street, one more note in the endless symphony of vengeance. That night, Veyus burned. We razed their city centers, toppled their monuments, shattered their archives. Everything that had made them proud turned to rubble beneath our boots. Their broadcasts, once filled with propaganda, now showed flames and human banners rising above the ruins. It wasn't just war, it was a message. We had not forgotten, we had not forgiven, and we would not stop. But vengeance has a cost. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, I walked through what remained of their capital square. Bodies lay piled like broken dolls, human and alien alike. My boots crunched against shattered glass and spent casings. Around me, my men moved like ghosts, faces hollow, some laughing, some silent, all carrying weight that could never be put down. One of my lieutenants, an old soldier named Grant, fell in beside me. His face was scarred, his eyes tired. "Tell me straight," he said, voice rough. "Are we any better than them now?" I stopped, staring at the flames climbing into the sky. For a long moment, I said nothing. Because the truth was heavy, heavier than any rifle I'd ever carried. Finally, I answered. "Better doesn't matter. All that matters is that they know what they did to us. All that matters is that they pay." He nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. The same doubt that sometimes crept into mine when the smoke cleared and the rage cooled. But then I remembered Boston. I remembered my wife's laugh, my son's small hand in mine. Both stolen in a single moment of fire, and the doubt burned away. We weren't here to be better. We were here to end them. Word of Veyus spread like wildfire across the empire. For the first time, their civilians knew fear. Their cities tightened defenses. Their colonies whispered of the humans who came with fire. What they once saw as a distant war became a nightmare creeping into their homes. And for us, it was only the beginning. We struck again and again, planet after planet, colony after colony. Some fought fiercely, their soldiers throwing themselves into the fire. Others collapsed in panic, surrendering before the first shot. None were spared. Every city we took became ash, every world another scar carved into their empire. The galaxy began to whisper our name. Humanity, the species that refused to die, the species that brought war like a plague. And I, once a broken man digging through the rubble of Boston, became the face of their nightmare. But with every victory came more blood, more weight, more whispers in the dark when the guns went silent. I could see it in my men, in the hollowness of their laughter, the emptiness of their eyes. We were winning, but what was left of us to celebrate? Sometimes I wondered if vengeance was hollow, if in burning their worlds, we were only digging our own graves deeper. But then I'd remember their declaration, broadcast over our skies. "You will kneel or be erased." We hadn't knelt. We hadn't been erased. And now it was their turn to feel what those words truly meant. By the time the campaign ended, Veyus was nothing but ruins. Its towers toppled, its fields burned, its people scattered or buried. We left no stone unscarred, no voice unbroken. Humanity had carved its vengeance into the very soil. As our fleet rose back into orbit, engines roaring, I stood once more on the bridge of the capital ship. Below us, the planet smoldered, its once bright cities reduced to scars. My hands tightened on the railing, knuckles white. "They declared war on Earth," I whispered to myself, to the ghosts that never left my side. "Now we declare the end of their civilization." The men around me heard it, and their voices rose behind me, repeating the words until the ship itself seemed to tremble with them. The Empire had awakened humanity's wrath. And wrath has no mercy. The maps of war had changed. On Earth, our strategy had been desperation. Hit-and-run strikes, sabotage, guerrilla tactics. In orbit, it had been raids and theft, survival with stolen tools. But now, deep inside their empire, our maps no longer showed Earth at all. Instead, they were filled with alien worlds, trade routes, colonies, fuel depots, and strongholds marked in crimson. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't defending. We were advancing. Our fleets grew with every victory. What had once been a ragged band of stolen ships became a storm. Every captured cruiser added to our strength. Every destroyed convoy stripped them weaker. Our engineers, men and women who once built skyscrapers and bridges, now rebuilt alien tech into hybrid war machines. Our ships still looked ugly, patched together with steel and fire, but they carried more teeth than anything Earth had ever dreamed of. And at the heart of it all was the will to fight. That was what they could never replicate. For them, war was duty. For us, war was everything. The campaign into the Inner Empire began with blood. We struck a world called Kiroth, one of their industrial giants. Its skies burned with endless factories, its oceans choked with machinery. Entire cities were nothing but steel and smoke. This was no colony of civilians. It was their backbone, the forge that fed their armies. Taking it would break them. We fell on Kiroth with everything we had. Our fleets roared into orbit, weapons carving through their defenses. Their warships poured out in response, sleek, disciplined, deadly. This time they were ready. They no longer underestimated us. The battle that followed lasted days. I remember the bridge shuddering as plasma fire tore across our shields, the air thick with smoke from ruptured systems. Orders shouted across comms, screams cut short as ships vanished into fire. Outside, the void was chaos. Human fighters swarming like hornets, alien cruisers unleashing volleys that split them apart. The black of space was drowned in red and white, the stars themselves hidden by fire. We lost men by the thousands. Entire wings burned away in minutes, but so did they. Our ships rammed theirs, detonating charges from inside. Our fighters clung to their hulls, cutting their way in like surgeons of death. Every time they thought we were finished, we rose again, claws sunk deeper into their throats. And when the last of their fleets broke, limping back toward their core, Kiroth was ours. The factories were gutted. The skies burned. Humanity had carved another scar into their empire. But the cost was heavy. When the smoke cleared, our fleet was half gone. Too many names were added to the lists we no longer had paper to write on. Men I'd fought beside for years were just gone. Their ships, their voices, erased in fire. Victory tasted like ash. It was after Kiroth that I started to notice the change in my men. Once when we won, there had been laughter. Ragged, broken laughter, but laughter nonetheless. The kind of laughter that said, "We're still alive, somehow." But now victories brought silence. Or worse, empty grins. Men who once cried for their families no longer spoke of them at all. They had buried their grief so deep that only vengeance remained. We were becoming predators, not just in the way we fought, but in the way we lived. Sleep came less and less. Eyes grew colder, movements sharper. Mercy, already dead, was forgotten entirely. One night, after the fires of Kiroth, I walked the decks and found a young fighter sitting alone, polishing his stolen rifle. His face was hollow, skin pale under the artificial lights. "Get some rest," I told him. He didn't look up. "Can't sleep." "Nightmares?" He finally raised his eyes, and what I saw in them wasn't fear. It was emptiness. "No. Nothing. Haven't dreamed in months." That was when I knew. Humanity wasn't just destroying the enemy. We were destroying ourselves. But there was no time to stop. From Kiroth, we drove deeper. Planet after planet. Station after station. Some worlds fought to the last soldier. Others broke quickly, their governors surrendering, begging for mercy that didn't exist. We burned them all. The enemy tried new tactics. They deployed heavier ships, war machines we had never seen, massive leviathans bristling with weapons, their hulls thick as mountains. On Earth, such a ship could have leveled entire continents alone. But against us, even leviathans bled. At the Battle of Zethar's Ring, one of those behemoths cut through our fleet like a scythe. Ship after ship fell, its guns carving entire wings into ash. Our comms were filled with screams, panic, chaos. It should have ended us, but then one of our destroyers, crippled and burning, rammed itself straight into the Leviathan's side. The explosion tore through its core, ripping the monster apart in a blaze that lit the void. The name of that ship, the Iron Resolve, became legend. Its crew, farmers, miners, fathers, were dead, but their sacrifice gave us the battle. That was what separated us from them. They fought for orders. We fought for graves. And that made us unstoppable. Yet the further we pushed, the more resistance hardened. The enemy began to rally. No longer fractured, no longer arrogant. They fought with desperation. For the first time, I saw in them the same fire that had burned in us. Their empire was beginning to feel what Earth had felt, and desperation makes anyone dangerous. The war grew darker, battles longer, bloodier, civilians caught between firestorms, whole cities reduced to nothing but glass and ash. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, watching humanity and empire tear each other apart. And in the quiet moments, I asked myself if we were still human at all. I'll never forget the day we hit their world of Arvenis. It was a jewel of their empire, a cultural heart, filled not with factories or armies, but with art, music, knowledge. Their soldiers fought fiercely, but it wasn't a military stronghold, it was a symbol, and we destroyed it anyway. The order had been mine. We couldn't afford to leave any symbols behind, not when Earth had none left. So we bombarded their libraries, toppled their monuments, burned their theaters. Everything that made them proud turned to ash. When the fires finally died, I walked through the ruins and felt nothing. No triumph, no sorrow, just emptiness. One of my men turned to me, his face smeared with soot. "Commander," he said, "are we still fighting for Earth, or are we just fighting because we don't know how to stop?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. The alien empire began to fracture, colonies rebelled, outposts deserted. Their fleets, once endless, grew thinner with every campaign. Humanity was bleeding them dry. But with every world we conquered, I felt the weight grow heavier. The ghosts of the dead whispered in every silence. My men laughed less, slept less, lived less. We were winning the war. But at what cost? On the bridge one night, Grant, my scarred lieutenant, the one who had followed me since Boston, spoke quietly. "They're breaking," he said, nodding at the reports scattered across the table. "You've done it. We've done it. Their empire's on its knees." I stared at the map. Red marks stretched across their core worlds, their once mighty banners shattered. Victory was close, so close I could taste it. But instead of triumph, I felt the same cold emptiness I had felt in Arvenis. "Tell me something, Grant," I said. "When this is over, what's left of us?" He was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "Doesn't matter. They took everything. We'll take everything. That's the only truth left." I nodded. Because maybe he was right. But deep down, I wondered if when this war ended, there'd be anything left worth calling humanity. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But the end was coming. And it would not be gentle. The maps no longer showed scattered colonies or distant outposts. They showed the heart of the empire. For years, they had ruled the stars from their core worlds, vast planets of gleaming cities, endless fleets, towering monuments to their dominance. Those worlds were legend, the seat of their power, the place from which they had once declared humanity unfit to live. To reach them was to strike at their gods. And now, at last, our fleet was here. I stood on the bridge of our capital ship, staring at the holographic display. A dozen red icons pulsed across the map, each one a fortress world, defended by fleets larger than anything we had faced before. My men shifted restlessly around me, their eyes burning with hunger. We were close, So close, but close did not mean safe. "This will be their last line," I said, voice low but steady. "They will throw everything they have at us, their fleets, their armies, their people. They know if they lose here, they lose everything." "Good," one of the younger officers muttered. His face was gaunt, his hands scarred. "Then we'll kill everything." A few men chuckled darkly, but most were silent. The silence of wolves circling before the kill. The first strike fell on a world called Koresh, one of their military hubs. Its orbit was a fortress, ringed with stations, minefields, fleets stacked like blades. We went in with fire. Our ships surged forward, engines burning bright, weapons spitting fury. The void lit up with death. Their fleets met us head-on, disciplined, precise, but we tore through them with sheer will. Ships rammed one another, hulls splitting open, men sucked screaming into the void. Boarding pods slammed into alien cruisers, spilling men armed with knives and explosives into their halls. For days, the battle raged. Koresh's skies became a graveyard of steel. I remember standing on the bridge, the ship trembling with each hit, smoke choking the air, alarms howling in my ears. Reports flooded in, ships lost, men dead, fleets breaking apart. But still we pushed. By the third day, their defenses cracked. Our fleet poured through, hammering the planet's surface. Cities that had stood for centuries crumbled beneath fire. Their soldiers fought to the last, but it didn't matter. Koresh fell, and with it, one more wall of their empire. But the cost was staggering. A third of our fleet gone. Entire divisions erased. The victory felt hollow, another mountain of corpses for another scar on the map. And yet none of us hesitated. Because vengeance doesn't count the dead. We pressed on. World after world burned. Their defenses grew fiercer, their fleets larger, but nothing could stop us. Every battle was slaughter, on both sides. The void was littered with wreckage, drifting bodies frozen in silence, ships torn apart like paper. I led from the front, always in the thick of it. My rifle never cooled, my hands never stopped shaking from the recoil. I stopped keeping count of the dead. There were too many. And yet, every time we razed another city, every time we saw their banners fall, there was a flicker of satisfaction. Not joy, joy had died long ago, but the grim satisfaction of a promise kept. They had declared war on Earth. And now their gods were bleeding. But victory didn't silence the doubts. One night, after a brutal fight over their world of Tehran, I walked the decks and found Grant leaning against a bulkhead, staring at the stars through a cracked viewport. His face was tired, older than his years, his hands trembling slightly. "You ever wonder," he asked, without looking at me, "if we're even human anymore?" I didn't answer at first. "Look at us," he went on. "We kill everything. We burn cities, slaughter civilians, tear down everything they ever built. What's the difference between us and them now?" I thought of Boston, of my wife's smile, my son's laugh, of the rubble and silence where they had once been. "The difference," I said finally, "is that they started this." He looked at me then, eyes hollow. "And when it's over? When there's nothing left of them? What are we then?" I had no answer. The deeper we pushed, the more desperate they became. At the Battle of Nereth, they unleashed weapons we had never seen, massive energy storms that ripped through space, tearing ships apart in flashes of white. Half our fleet was crippled before we adapted. But still we came, still we fought. At the siege of Lyrnos, their civilians themselves rose up, armed with crude weapons, fighting in the streets beside their soldiers. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. Our men cut them down. I remember walking through a plaza, the ground slick with blood, the cries of their people echoing off burning walls. And still, no hesitation, no mercy. The war was no longer about Earth, not really. Earth was gone, broken, ash. This was about something deeper, about proving that no one could ever break us again, about showing the galaxy that humanity was not prey. And so we kept killing. By the time we reached the gates of their homeworld, their empire was a shadow of itself. Fleets shattered, colonies burned, worlds scarred. The galaxy watched in silence as humanity, once thought weak, dragged gods down into the dirt. Our fleet gathered above their capital planet, a shining jewel of towers and light, the throne of their power. For centuries, it had been untouchable. For centuries, it had ruled without fear. Now, it trembled beneath our guns. On the bridge, my men stood silent, eyes locked on the world below. I felt their hunger, their rage, their grief. "This is it," I said quietly. "Their heart, their throne, their end." A murmur rippled through the room. Not cheers, not laughter, just grim resolve. We had come too far to turn back. The bombardment began at dawn. Our fleet opened fire, beams and missiles tearing into the skies. Their defenses lit up in response, a storm of energy lashing against us. The void erupted with war. Ships clashed in a frenzy of light and fire, explosions rocking the heavens. On the ground, our dropships fell like meteors, spilling men into their streets. Battles raged from tower to tower, plaza to plaza. Their armies fought with a desperation I had never seen, but desperation was our mother tongue. I led the charge through their capital streets, rifle blazing, smoke choking the air. Around me, my men moved like shadows, cutting down anything that moved. Their banners burned, their monuments toppled, their voices silenced beneath our boots. The city that had once ruled the galaxy crumbled into ash. By nightfall, their world burned. I stood on the balcony of their shattered palace, overlooking the ruins. Fires raged across the skyline, smoke blotting out the stars. The cries of the dying echoed through the streets, mingling with the laughter of my men. We had done it. We had broken them. But as I stared at the ruin, I felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, not even satisfaction, only emptiness. They had declared war on Earth. Humanity had declared the end of their civilization, and now, standing in their ashes, I wondered if we had ended ourselves too. The fires of their capital still burned when the silence began. For years, the galaxy had trembled with the noise of our war, explosions that shook the stars, fleets clashing like storms, cities screaming as they crumbled into dust. But now, after their last stronghold fell, the noise was gone. Silence. It hung heavy over their homeworld, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant groans of shattered steel. Their empire, once untouchable, was nothing but ruins. Their fleets drifted in orbit as broken hulks. Their armies were corpses rotting in their own streets. Their people, what few remained, cowered in shadows, waiting for the next hammer to fall. And humanity stood victorious. I walked through their capital square, boots crunching against rubble and bone. Around me, men laughed and shouted, their rifles slung carelessly, their faces smeared with soot and blood. They moved through the ruins like conquerors, tearing down alien banners, raising scraps of Earth's flags in their place. But when I looked closer, I saw something else. Their laughter was empty, their smiles hollow. They had fought too long, killed too much. Victory should have brought relief, triumph, even joy. Instead, it brought nothing. We had won, and none of us knew what that meant anymore. At the palace, I stood on the balcony overlooking the smoldering city. Grant joined me, his face lined deeper than ever, his eyes red-rimmed. He had been with me since the beginning, from the ashes of Boston to the ruins of this alien throne. He had seen everything I had seen. "It's over," he said quietly, though his voice carried no relief. I shook my head. "It's never over. Not after this." He frowned. "We broke them. Their fleets, their armies, their cities. Their empire is finished." I turned to look at him. "And what about us, Grant? What are we now?" He had no answer. None of us did. Word spread quickly beyond their empire. For centuries, they had ruled the galaxy with fear, their word law, their fleets unstoppable. Now whispers ran like wildfire. Humanity had destroyed them. Humanity, the weak, primitive species from a dying blue planet, had crushed gods into dust. Other species watched us with wide eyes. Some cheered in silence, grateful their oppressors had fallen. Others trembled, knowing that if humanity could erase one empire, nothing stopped us from erasing more. We had become the story told in hushed tones, the monsters in the dark, the storm that no wall could hold back. For the first time, humanity wasn't prey. But prey that becomes predator does not easily stop hunting. Our fleet spread through the ruins of their empire. Worlds once proud and gleaming were now rubble. Colonies stripped of their defenses bent the knee without a fight. Surrender came swiftly, but mercy never followed. We had forgotten how to offer it. Everywhere we went, we left scars. On one world, my men dragged governors from their palaces and executed them in the streets. On another, they rounded up survivors and forced them to watch as their cities burned. Some of it was vengeance, some of it was madness, but none of it was justice. Justice had died long ago, buried under Boston's rubble, drowned in Earth's oceans of fire. The war had ended, but the killing did not. Men who had known nothing but blood for years could not put their rifles down. They lived for the fight, and without it, they were empty. So they found new enemies. Raiders turned on surrendering colonies. Soldiers clashed over spoils. Rival commanders carved their names into the ashes, building power from the wreckage. Humanity had united to destroy the empire. But now, with the empire gone, cracks began to show. I tried to hold it together. I stood on the bridge of the capital ship, watching as our fleets moved through conquered space, and felt the weight of it pressing on me. I had led them here. I had pushed us from the ruins of Earth to the throne of their gods. Every order I gave, every decision I made, had been one more step down this path. But now, standing at the end, I wondered if I had led us to victory or to damnation. Grant saw it, too. One night, he confronted me in the war room, slamming his fist against the table. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "We've already won. But the men, look at them. They're killing for nothing now. They're eating themselves alive." I met his eyes. "And if we stop? What then? Do you think they'll let us live in peace? Do you think the galaxy will just forget what we've done?" He leaned forward, his voice hard. "If we keep going, there won't be anything left of us to live at all." His words cut deep because I knew he was right. But I also knew there was no turning back. The ghosts haunted me more than ever. At night, when the battles were done and the fires died down, I saw their faces. My wife, my son. The men I had lost in Boston, in Providence, on Kerith, on every battlefield that had carved this war into our souls. They whispered to me in the silence. Not forgiveness, not comfort, just silence. And I realized the truth. We had won the war, but we had lost ourselves. The galaxy began to shift around us. Some species reached out, cautiously, offering alliances, desperate not to be the next in line. Others bristled in fear, strengthening their fleets, preparing for the storm they thought must surely come. We had become the new axis around which everything turned. The irony was sharp. The invaders had once declared humanity a threat to order. They had been right. We weren't just a threat. We were extinction made flesh. In the ruins of the enemy's empire, I stood with my men, listening to the crackle of fire and the silence of the stars. The war was over, but there was no victory left to claim. We had destroyed them. Their civilization was dust, their power broken, their name erased. But when I looked at my men, at the hollow eyes and empty smiles, I realized something darker. We had declared the end of their civilization, and in doing so, we had declared the end of our own. The ghosts of Earth would never let me go. But I knew this much. Vengeance had carried us across the stars. Vengeance had broken gods. Vengeance had made humanity feared. And vengeance would never end. Because once you drink from that fire, you can never put it down. The war was over. Not in the way wars are supposed to end, with treaties and signatures, with parades and banners, with the promise of peace. No, this war ended in silence, in fire, in the cold ash of a civilization wiped from the stars. The enemy no longer existed. Their fleets were gone, their armies buried, their cities reduced to rubble. Worlds that had once glittered with life were now graveyards orbiting dead suns. For the first time in history, their empire, an empire that had ruled for centuries, was nothing but memory. And humanity had done it. We had destroyed them. I stood on the bridge of our capital ship, staring at the galaxy map projected before me. No more red markers, no more strongholds, no more fleets, no more defiance. Just empty space where once there had been power. We had carved a wound across the stars, a wound so deep it would never heal. But as I looked at it, all I felt was emptiness. The men around me muttered in low voices, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They had fought too long, killed too much. Victory should have brought relief, but it brought nothing. We were wolves that had hunted until there was no prey left, and now, with blood still dripping from our teeth, we had nothing to do but stare at the silence. News spread quickly across the galaxy. Other species, those who had once bowed to our enemy, watched us with terror. Some whispered thanks, grateful the empire had fallen. But most trembled in fear, asking the same question: what will humanity do now? They had reason to fear. Our fleets were vast, swollen with stolen ships. Our armies were hardened, ruthless, forged in the fires of vengeance. We had proven that nothing could stop us, not fleets, not empires, not gods. We had become the terror of the galaxy. But we had also become something worse. I thought often of Boston. It had begun there, in the rubble of a ruined city, digging through ash with bloodied hands, searching for my family. That day, I had sworn vengeance. That day, I had become a soldier. And now, standing on the bridge of a stolen warship at the edge of the galaxy, I realized vengeance had consumed everything. It had taken my grief, my rage, my love, my humanity. It had carried me across the stars and left me standing on a mountain of corpses. We had declared the end of their civilization, but in doing so, we had declared the end of ours. The cracks were already showing. With no enemy left, our unity began to fracture. Commanders who had once fought side by side now glared across the table like rivals. Men argued over spoils, ships, worlds, prisoners. Raids broke out between factions, human fighting human, as though we had forgotten why we had fought at all. We had been united by vengeance, but vengeance cannot build, it only destroys. And now, with nothing left to destroy, it turned inward. Grant saw it coming before I did. One night, he found me in the war room, staring at the silent map. His face was tired, his voice low. "This is how it ends," he said. I frowned. "We've already ended it. We broke them. The war's finished." He shook his head. "Not the war. Us, humanity. We don't know how to stop. We don't remember how. You've seen the men. They're empty. They're killing for scraps now because killing is all they know. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. But the truth was written in the silence of the ship, in the hollowness of every victory. He was right. We had lost the war the moment we won it. The galaxy feared us, but it did not respect us. To them, we were not liberators, not survivors. We were butchers, executioners, a plague of fire. Some species began to whisper of coalitions, alliances to contain us, to stop us before we consumed everything. Others reached out with trembling hands, offering tribute, desperate to buy safety. And we had no answer. We didn't know what we wanted anymore. We only knew how to destroy. The faces haunted me more than ever. At night, in the silence of my quarters, I saw them, my wife, my son, my men, fallen in battle, lost to fire and void. They stared at me with hollow eyes, not accusing, not forgiving, just empty. Sometimes I spoke to them, whispering into the dark. We did it. We avenged you. We made them pay. But the silence never changed. Because vengeance does not bring back the dead. It only creates more. I began to wonder if this had been their plan all along. Not the empire we had destroyed, but the universe itself. Maybe humanity was never meant to win. Maybe survival was the cruelest curse of all, to live long enough to see what vengeance turns you into. We had proven we could not be broken. We had proven we could destroy gods. But in doing so, we had shattered ourselves. One day, I walked the decks of the capital ship and looked at the men who still followed me. They didn't look like men anymore. Their eyes were cold, their movements sharp, their laughter empty. They were wolves without prey, blades without purpose, and I realized something I had never admitted, even to myself. We had not won the war. We had only survived it, and survival had turned us into monsters. The galaxy now trembles at our name. We are the species that destroyed gods, the species that took vengeance so far it burned across the stars, the species that cannot stop killing because killing is all we have left. They declared war on Earth, and we declared the end of their civilization, but in the ashes, as I stare into the silence of the void, I know the truth. We also declared the end of ourselves. The stars burn quiet now. The fleets drift, scarred and hollow. The men march through conquered worlds with empty eyes. Humanity has its vengeance. Humanity has its victory. But humanity has no peace. And as I stand on the bridge, staring into the endless black, I understand at last. We are no longer survivors, no longer conquerors. We are the end.